We good?
We good.
We're
Let's
good.
go to that right now.
So let's go to Hello World with Shana Matthews.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you, Seth and Donna. Good morning from Seattle. My name is Shanna Matthews. I work at Microsoft in developer advocacy, focused on students. So I'm excited to be talking to all of you today, all you beginners, students out there, people coming in and trying to learn tech for the first time. It's really intimidating. So thank you for coming to hang out with us, and hopefully you can learn something. Today, I'm going to be giving a session called Hello World in 3 languages. The idea is to be like a brief compare and contrast between some of the 3 most popular and beginner-friendly languages. And it's kind of stuff that I wish someone had told me when I was first trying to get started with coding. Before we jump right into it, I actually wanted to talk to you about some of the resources that are available after you listen to this talk. If you're excited about learning some of these languages, please go check out Microsoft Learn. I'm sure you've heard a little bit about it, and you'll hear more about it throughout the conference, but Microsoft Learn is your best friend for learning anything about technology. The link here, aka.ms/SDC/Hello World, links you to a really awesome learning path about Python that's super beginner friendly. So it starts from the very basics, helps you get started with everything from writing your first Hello World program in Python to setting up a developer environment, and keep it on going. Also, please hang out with us here, ask us questions. We're live on Learn TV and at Twitch. I will be on Twitch after my session to follow up and answer questions if you guys ask them. I won't be monitoring the chat while I'm chatting with you guys here, but please ask your questions. Someone will be on trying to answer them as I go, and then I'll be on afterwards to follow up with anything that was missed. Cool. Okay. So like I said, this talk is kind of one of the things I wish someone taught me when I was first learning how to get started with coding. There's just so much context. There's so much syntax. There's so many weird background things. There's just so much that you're expected to know already going into it. So the idea of this is to like help you get started with some of that stuff, take you behind the scenes a little bit, tell you a few things that I wish I would have known when I was learning. And we're going to be using the Hello World program as our example when we're writing or messing with any code today. And I'm going to give you a tiny bit of background about what the Hello World program is, why it came to be. Probably, maybe if you're watching, you've heard of it or you've seen it before. Right now on screen, we have the Hello World program in the programming language C. We're not going to be talking too much about C today. It's not one of those top 3 languages that I would recommend for beginners, but it is really interesting for historical reasons. And it's tied into where the Hello World program even came from in the first place. So let's talk a little bit about that. Hello World, as I said, is usually the first program you write in a new language. It's really to help you get your feet under you, make sure you can do just the very simplest thing in a language. Make sure you can print some stuff to your console, to your terminal, print some stuff out. So why do we use Hello World? We use it to get our feet under us. We use it to get familiar with a new language, do something simple, make sure we can actually run a program. And where did it come from? So the Hello World program is widely credited to the guy in this picture right here. His name is Brian Kernighan. He's super famous for writing a book called The C Programming Language with his co-author Dennis Ritchie. And the program Hello World showed up in this book about the C programming language, but that's not actually where it came from exactly. Brian Kernighan wrote this program actually in his first book before this one, which was about the programming language B, which, yeah, B is the programming language that came before C. That book was called A Tutorial Introduction to the Programming Language B. And in that book, he included the Hello World example, and then he wrote it again in the C programming language book, which was wildly popular, and it took off, and people have been using it really consistently ever since. So I think this is one of Kernighan's biggest legacies, the Hello World program, and of course, the C language as well. So what are we going to actually do today? We're going to look at Hello World programs in Python, C#, and JavaScript. We're going to play around with each of them a little bit. We're going to kind of understand what are some of the weird syntax quirks. Why might we as a beginner choose one of these languages over the others to try to learn it first? what are some like stereotypes about this language? What's some of the context around it? You know, why I like to think of it. Why are you going to find people like poking fun at each one of these different languages? So like you can be in on the joke when people are making jokes about these languages. So really the best way to get started and playing around with any language, with anything in tech, is to just get your hands dirty and do it. So we are going to do the rest of this session pretty much, except for maybe a little bit at the very end, in Visual Studio Code right here. A quick note before I just jump right into it. My setup here in Visual Studio Code is not quite standard and not quite normal. It's just something that's to make it easy to run all these languages at once in one fast session. So if you see stuff that's a little funky, like all this stuff going on at the bottom, all these folders, don't worry about it too much. We're only going to be focusing on what's here in the editor portion and what we do here in the terminal portion. So just typing out a few commands. And if you have any questions about what else is going on in here, please throw them in the chat. People will be happy to answer, and I'd be happy to talk more about it afterwards. Okay, so first up is Python. Python is one of my absolute favorite languages. I think it's super beginner friendly. It is not the language that I started in personally writing code, but I think it's the language I wish I started in. And part of the reason for that is the syntax is extremely simple. So this is the Hello World program in Python. And as you can see, it's just 2 lines of code. It's super simple. All we're doing here is defining a variable called message, and then calling the print function with that variable and printing it out. So it's very intuitive. You can kind of tell exactly what's going on here, even if maybe you don't have a background in coding. I bet if someone had never written code before, they might be able to guess even what's happening here, which is not always common. So how do we run our Python code? That's also simple. I'm going to type Python 3 on the command line and then the name of the file that I want to run. If you're on Windows versus Linux, you might type just Python versus Python 3, but we're typing Python 3 for today. So we can see we have run our code. It worked. We got our message, hello world. And if we wanted to change the string, hello friends, we can run it again. Bam. That's hello world. So let's talk about syntax of Python. And when I'm talking about syntax, I mean like the weird things that you have to type on the screen to actually make the code work. Python syntax is actually pretty easy to grasp compared to some other programming languages, but it is odd in some ways. So one of the ways that it's the weirdest is what Python does, or how it cares about white space. And by white space, what I mean is the characters that you type in here that don't just look like anything. So I'm typing a bunch of spaces, and if I highlight it, you can see those dots mean spaces. You can type tabs, and if I highlight it, you can see those little arrows mean tabs. So tabs and spaces are pretty much what we refer to when we say white space. And Python is really funky compared to pretty much all other programming languages because it cares about white space. Let me show you one example of what that means. So I'm going to make another variable is conference and set it to true. So I've just made another variable and set the value of that variable to true. And then I'm going to write an if statement to check something about a variable. So I'm going to check if is conference. And so what that's doing is checking if is conference is true. Then I'm going to change message. Let's see if I can spell. Okay, so quick, let's run this just to show that it works. So what we've done is we've got this variable, set it to true. We're checking if it's true, and then we change our message. You can see that the message was changed. Awesome. So the thing that's funky about this is Python here is actually looking at this white space right here that I'm highlighting to tell what goes in this if block. Most programming languages are going to look for curly braces instead. Curly braces. So it's going to look at these things, which are called curly braces, to try to check if something is part of an if statement or another logical block. Python doesn't do that. Python, we don't use curly braces, and it's a little odd. We use white space instead. So one kind of gotcha with this white space thing. Oh, and I'll show you, like if we did that instead, Python's not going to be happy. You can see already Python is saying like, hey, I expected this to be indented. So let's indent it again. Don't want it to be that mad at me. And let's look at one gotcha with Python. So we said that we care about white space. And one thing to keep in mind, as I was saying, there's two kinds of white space normally that we talk about: spaces and tabs. And lots of programmers like to argue about spaces versus tabs. I personally don't like to argue about spaces versus tabs. I like to say, hey, do whatever works for you and your code. But Python, you need to be consistent at least. That's the most important thing with Python. So right here, we have two tabs. We have a tab here, we have a tab here. And that's all good. We can do whatever we want. But what we can't do is add spaces and tabs together in one file. So let's just like print something else. Hello. So as you can see here, we've got spaces here, tabs here, and Python is already telling us that this is an issue. We have an inconsistent use of tabs and spaces in indentation. So if we tried to run it, we'd get that same error. Visual Studio Code is being really nice to us and kind of showing us that error before we even do it. So thank you for that, VS Code. So I'll just show you, if you made them both spaces, you'd have no problem. So space is fine, tab's fine. You just gotta pick one or the other. Okay, cool. So another just thing to mention that we'll maybe see more is that we don't use semicolons in Python. That's because, again, try to keep it as simple as possible. So we don't use semicolons. We'll see those in other languages. So let's think, why would we use Python? If you've kind of heard of this new AI or data science thing that's becoming really popular these days, Python is a great language if you think you might be interested in data science, because it's very popular. It's one of the most widespread languages in AI and data science. Python is also great at a lot of other things too, though. So it's not just niche for that area. It's great for web development, especially backend stuff. It's great for general development. It's great for prototyping because you can write pretty quickly when you're using Python. It's also good for people who kind of don't consider themselves programmers, but have to write code for some reason. So they might be wanting to automate some tasks that they're doing, or they might be a researcher and just need to write a little bit of code to help with some of their research. Python is great for all of those people. One stereotype about Python before we move on to our next language is that Python is slow. This stereotype is kind of true. It can be true. One of the reasons for that, one of the reasons Python can be slower than other languages is because of typing. And when I say typing, I am not actually referring to the typing that you do on your keyboard. I'm talking about variable types. So I mentioned that we were defining a couple variables here. These variables have types to kind of help our compiler, help our interpreter know what we're supposed to be able to do with them, know how to treat them. So the type of this message variable we can see, because VS Code, again, is being really nice and awesome for us, is str. And str is short for string. So string refers to words, basically, a series of letters or characters that you put in quotation marks. We can see isConference is a type bool, which is short for Boolean, which just means it's going to be true or false. So there's a lot of other different variable types, and you could even define your own in most languages. But the interesting thing about Python compared to some other languages, and one of the things that makes it slower, is that you can change the type of a variable. So when we defined our message variable, we didn't say anything about what type it was. And then later, if we want to change it from being a string type to being an int or integer type, or just a number, a whole number, Python has absolutely no issue with that. It totally lets me do it, no problem. Python is able to do that, no problem, because it's doing a lot of extra work for us on the back end to make that possible. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to C#, our next awesome programming language for beginners. Sharp. And I'm just clearing this terminal so we can get rid of all of that Python-y stuff and we can just think about C# now. So let's actually talk about stereotypes first. C# is stereotyped for being very verbose. I think when you compare this, what we're seeing on our screen, just our Hello World program here, which we have 14 lines of code here already. I guess we can get rid of this. 13 lines of code. Versus Hello World in Python, which is just 2, we could say that, yeah, maybe it's a little verbose. There's a lot going on here. To just do, again, really 2 main lines of code. We have to have a lot else on the screen. Sometimes people will call all the rest of this stuff on the screen boilerplate code. I don't really know where the term boilerplate comes from. Maybe someone in the chat, if you know, type it in the chat, I'd be interested. But it just means like extra code that we're making explicit. So a lot of the stuff that we've written out explicitly here is kind of happening behind the scenes in one way or another in other languages. But in languages like C#, we write it out, we make it totally explicit. So we as a developer can see exactly what's going on and sometimes maybe even tweak it if we'd like to. So if we're really trying to compare and contrast, though, these 2 languages, these 2 lines are the important thing. So again, we're defining a message, and this time we're explicitly saying it's a string, and then we're printing it out. So to run this, there's lots of ways to run C# and other .NET family languages. I'm going to run them on the command line just to be a little bit more similar to how we did it in Python. So what we're doing here, just type .NET run, and .NET is the family of languages that C# belongs to. And then we can see we ran it, hello world, awesome. So let's quickly talk a little bit about syntax. One contrast, as I said, is that Python is weird, cares about white space. Most other languages, including C#, do not. So I can like do whatever I want. I can even put this all the way up here, right by my little curly braces. C# is going to have absolutely no issue with that. It'll run it no problem. I can have tabs, I can have spaces, I can have literally no tabs or spaces or any kind of white space in my whole program. C# is going to be fine with that. I can even put these on the same line because we're using those semicolons to separate lines. C# says A-okay. But I'm going to say not A-okay. That's really strange, and people don't like to see code like that. White space is there for a reason, to kind of like help us be sane. Cool. Okay, so one other quick note. I talked about typing. So C# is not as chill about typing as Python is. So we have kind of said that message is a string, and if I try to change message later to another type of variable, like an integer again, C# is going to tell me it can't implicitly do that. So it's going to give me an error by default unless I do some fancy stuff to try to fix that. So we're seeing this cannot convert type int to string, and that's because C# is convinced message is a string. So that strict typing, what we call that, is one of the things that can make it easier for C# to be really fast. Cool. So why would we use C#? So C# is a great all-around language. It's part of the .NET family of languages, so it's compatible with a lot of things. It's got better compatibility with other languages if you're trying to use it for a really big project. You have to write in multiple languages. It works well with Azure. It works well with the cloud if you're interested in that kind of development. It's also really popular for game programming or augmented reality or virtual reality programming. C# is used in Unity, and there's also some game engines that C# is used for too. I love C#. It's a language that I like writing in a lot. I actually like that it's verbose. I think it's a super awesome programming language. Cool. All right. Last up, JavaScript. So let's clear this again. JavaScript. So C#, what we were just looking at, fun fact, is actually similar to a language called Java. And another fun fact, the language Java is absolutely not really similar to JavaScript at all. So don't let that trip you up if you're ever talking about all these programming languages. So Python, C#, and JavaScript, I think are all great beginner programming languages. They're awesome to get started with. I will admit, JavaScript is not my favorite of the bunch. It's just one that I haven't worked with as much, but JavaScript is really awesome. There's a lot of great reasons to use JavaScript, and the main one is it's extremely popular. It's everywhere. JavaScript really is the language of the web, and web development is like the most employable, maybe, programming type of job. It's just so popular. Everyone is doing web development. Web development is part of everything, and JavaScript is all over the place. There's tons of frameworks and libraries to use with it. So let's quickly just run this. So we can see, again, we have just our 2 lines of code. It looks kind of similar to Python. I'm going to be running this with something called Node. Node is a runtime for JavaScript. There's a great YouTube course that just came out on YouTube. Maybe someone can drop the link in the chat, or I will later, to teach you all about JavaScript and then about Node. So I totally recommend that. Brand new, really awesome people worked on it. So JavaScript right here, just because it has 2 lines, it kind of looks a little bit more like Python, but in a lot of ways, JavaScript is actually more like C# if we're talking about syntax only. So we are supposed to use semicolons. We will use curly braces. So let's quickly conference true. So if we were going to write an if statement, conference, we're going to use our curly braces again. And JavaScript does not care about our white space. So we could do something weird right here. Hello, viewers. So we could do something strange like that. JavaScript wouldn't care at all. Totally fine with it. So we kind of talked about why would we use JavaScript, language of the web, all over the place, a little bit of syntax. One stereotype about JavaScript is that it's quirky, I will say. It is odd. So one of those oddities, really, you can see right here. And the fact that I didn't put a semicolon, that's honestly just because I forgot. But JavaScript is a little odd compared to other languages because it's not going to care too much either way. By default, Node isn't giving us an error if we have that semicolon or if we don't have that semicolon. That's because JavaScript does some extra work behind the scenes. Like if you forgot a semicolon, it kind of tries to insert it when it's trying to run that code for you, which is nice, but it's always better to remember to put your semicolons in with JavaScript. Another quirky quirk with JavaScript is something called, what is it called? Type coercion. It's called type coercion. So I won't go too deep into what type coercion is, but I'll kind of just show you like an issue you might run into with type coercion. So right now I'm defining a new variable. So this variable was already of type string. I defined this variable of type string. But the interesting thing is these 2 types of strings are actually slightly different. One's a basic object, a basic string type, and one's like a fancier object string type. If you're really curious about what that means, happy to talk more about it in chat afterwards. But I just want to show you some of the implications. So if I want to check if those 2 strings are the same, I will, here, same. So I might check if they're the same like this using an if statement. And so I've checked, does this message equal this message? And it printed out same. So yes, it does equal the same thing. But if I do a quirky, weird JavaScript thing and add a third equal sign, it doesn't print out anything because now JavaScript does not say they are the same. And this is because of what I said, type coercion. So when we were just doing 2 equal signs, JavaScript was trying to do its best to make these 2 strings, these 2 objects, the same type before it compared them. With 3 equal signs, JavaScript didn't do any extra work to try to make the objects the same type before it checked what was in them, this actual hello world text. So just some funny JavaScript stuff. Okay, very last thing. We've shown 3 really great languages that are awesome for beginners. I just wanted to point out, it's great to learn programming languages because they can help get you a job, they can be really useful, but programming languages can also be really fun. So I wanted to show a really fun programming language called LolCode, just in the couple seconds we have left. This is an example of a programming language that is not going to help you get a job. It was just written for people to have fun and written for people to have fun trying to make a program in. So this is the Hello World program in LolCode. Let's run it really quickly. So what we're doing, the 2 lines that are the same again, is this I has a message. So we're defining a message variable, ITZ it's. So it equals hi world and then visible. So printing it out. Yeah, there's other great examples of LolCode if you look on the internet. Happy to talk more about it in chat. Yeah, otherwise catch me in chat. Don't forget to check out those resources on Microsoft Learn. There's also learning paths for learning Python, C#. There's a learning path on learning Node, and there's those YouTube series, a bunch of them that people at Microsoft have made for learning these new programming languages. So get out there, give it a try. Don't get scared, just keep learning. Thank you, everyone.